Hey there, welcome to the Drawing Codex. In this video, I want to do a pretty simple drawing lesson that focuses on one thing. How do we create different variations on basic anatomy? Basically, how to create big, strong characters or little kind of lean, smaller characters. And I'm going to fold in a couple of concepts as I normally do. We're going to define this goal as being similar to if you were going to create a Street Fighter character, or if you are going to design and have to redraw a Street Fighter character or something similar. We are following anatomy, we are making sure we put in all the right muscles, but we're exaggerating. And specifically in this lesson, what I want to talk about is how do we create these larger characters versus smaller characters. Now we're going to fold in the other sort of concept of traditional how to draw books. Again, my favorite being the Andrew Loomis books, and in this instance, Figure Drawing for All It's Worth. In this book, we are taught and it discusses how to create mannequins or simple stick figures that essentially are based on the skeleton or an easily maneuverable version of the human, a stick figure basically. And on top of that, we layer on all of the muscle, all of the different elements that make up people. Now, obviously, that's a fairly straightforward process when you're dealing with this kind of one-to-one, more standardized anatomy that you're going to see in the real world. But when we draw comics and stuff, which is what I do, the question is, how do I create much more interesting, sort of exaggerated characters? And do I need to modify that sort of basic stick figure mannequin in order to get that goal happening, in order to kind of create those bigger characters? It's a subtle point, but I think it's really, really important, and I know it's something that a lot of people have been asking for. So that's what we're going to do in this video. Let's get started. Alright, welcome to the Drawing Codex again. My name's Tim McBurney. I've been a professional working artist for over 20 years, and on this channel we're all about drawing cool stuff from our imagination, embracing the challenge of drawing, and mastering the craft of line and color illustration. If you're interested in developing your own line and color style that you can use for manga, comics, or bande dessinée, or concept art, pretty much whatever you want, this is where we create worlds with simple line and color. You can go check out my free quick start guide. It goes over the basics and what my recommendations are to get you up and started quickly in Photoshop using a simple, reliable process. The link's in the description and it's free. Go check it out. So this is one of those problems that is at the same time it's a small variation on just drawing the mannequin and kind of how we handle that. But it is one of these things that can be a real trip up if you kind of get a little bit lost in, again, thinking that you kind of have to stick very closely to one of these systems, like something that you would find again in Figure Drawing for All It's Worth. The idea here, and again, part of my general ethos in this channel, is just to describe how these are tools that you can use. These are ideas. And if you want to draw things that are, again, more like sort of comic books, like this sort of comic that I drew back in sort of 2009, 2010, we've got, sort of different types of characters, some sort of characters that are, monsterish, that don't follow typical anatomy. You want to draw things, again, like sort of the Street Fighter characters, and you're sort of thinking, well, look, how do I apply those Loomis concepts to this? And specifically, do I need to modify or do anything different if I want to create these bigger, sort of more, impressive, large characters, right? So, the question is really, do I need to modify or change anything depending on whether I want to draw Blanca or one of these big, sort of crazy, chunky characters versus if I want to draw Chun-Li or one of these kind of smaller characters. Now, obviously, we're going to change the musculature, but the question is, do we need to change the mannequin? Do we need to do anything different if we're going to change the overall proportions? Now, the answer to this question, I guess, is to a certain degree one of theory and practice versus implementation. So when we're learning, often what we're trying to do is just perfect our ability to kind of replicate some proportion. And often we start with a typical sort of Western idealized proportion, right? Like you've got here, and this allows us to learn. The implementation of that can be somewhat different though, and if you are repeatedly drawing your own character or some fan art for a different character, again, one of those larger Street Fighter characters, then you might actually want to modify that mannequin a little bit to allow you to better gauge how the pose is going to look. So that's really all I want to talk about, is just that simple concept. How do we modify that mannequin, and how do we utilize these tools that you would find in a book like Andrew Loomis's Figure Drawing for All It's Worth, and how do we actually apply that to drawing cool stuff? All right, so let's jump over to the drawing table and we'll get stuck in. All right, so here we are at the drawing table. Now, the problem is often that there's good information in these old how to draw books and how to draw books in general, but they often really focus on this generic anatomy. And what we often want to do is create highly divergent, more interesting, stylized, exaggerated anatomy. Now, I've made videos on this in the past. Specifically, what I want to talk about is as we change the character's size, do we need to change the mannequin, and what actually kind of happens? Now, obviously, there's two different sort of takes on this. The traditional sort of obvious way to sort of explain how this is done is that if we have a skeleton, the skeleton doesn't deviate that much from human to human. Now, it does deviate, obviously, but in general, you can have the same skeleton be covered with a lot of muscle or only a little bit of muscle. As people do crazy amounts of bodybuilding and inject massive amounts of steroids and other sort of stuff into their body, the skeleton will get bigger. Everything just will get bigger the more you sort of grow and build those things. Now, one of the things to keep in mind is that a lot of the points that we really view as making someone sort of big or small is obviously height and sort of width. And some of those things to a certain degree are genetic. Some people are just going to have wider shoulders. They're going to be built as sort of ectomorph, mesomorph, etc. But what we need to do is sort of think about, well, okay, that's all cool, right? That's all sort of anatomy. That's all the science of it. How do I draw it, right? That's what we want to sort of solve. So that's where, again, it's important to understand, look, this is the medical explanation. And yes, all of this stuff happens, but we're artists and we want to draw cool stuff. So how do we actually modify this to do what we want to do? So there's a lot of cool things that we can obviously play with. We can either just draw the mannequin to begin with, just as our sort of standard Loomis style Western generic anatomy, and then we can just add bulk on top of that. And to a certain degree, that will work for a while, right? That is going to do the job up to a certain point. But often, we need to go a little bit further than that. And that's where it's good to think about the mannequin as just being a tool that we use. And we can think about this mannequin mostly as just being a thing that is the most effective, most efficient way for you to pose your character. Now, if you are using musculature, which sort of only is adding, a fairly basic layer to that mannequin, then you probably don't need to modify it that much. But you will notice that, Loomis, when he's doing this, kind of adds what he calls this, like, draw a cape like this. So what he's doing is kind of actually a really good idea, I think, where he's sort of adding the shoulder cape. He's adding the shoulder area. And this kind of helps us to visualize what the actual body is going to be like. If you look at the skeleton, the problem with just drawing the skeleton is that this doesn't typically look like what a person looks like. All of this is covered with muscle. And while the skeleton is good for proportion, it doesn't always accurately represent what a person feels like, which is why Loomis is here saying, hey, add this little bit. Now, the trick is we can kind of do that ourselves. And this is where, again, I keep saying when people are drawing and writing books like this, they're describing things that they've done that work, and you can use those same things but you can also modify the same idea as long as it's effective. So if we think about from a first principle standpoint, the mannequin is there to help us draw the figure that we want to draw in the most efficient, effective way possible. Then if it's more efficient, more effective to add stuff to it, then we can obviously do that. And if it's more effective to kind of make it similar to the character that we actually want to draw, then that also is more effective. And that's obviously what we end up doing. Now, I think this also applies if you have characters that have significant areas of costuming that will sort of affect how they look, or if they have, sort of different anatomy. So if you look at, some of the characters in this book, I won't go into this too much in this video. I'll make a separate video that specifically goes over how to modify your mannequin further as an effective way to pose a character while we include the costume. So once you're, if you think about the mannequin and this whole system and this idea for thinking of a way to quickly pose your character to tell whether or not it's going to work within your drawing, often characters actually have a lot of posture and a lot of other stuff from their costume that actually makes up what is cool or interesting about that character. So the base anatomy is part of the character, but in a similar way to the Street Fighter characters, there's often other stuff like the hair or a specific piece of costume. For Akuma, it's kind of, like his hair is pretty significant. Maybe the beads as well are quite significant. For Chun-Li, right? Maybe these sort of bigger shoulder sort of elements of the costume are really, really important, because that's what will make you feel like the character is the character. And when you're drawing it, you kind of want to get a sense of that ASAP. So that's the basic idea here, is we want to sort of merge these ideas of the Loomis stick figure skeletal mannequin with our goal, which is to actually often draw more interesting and exciting things. All right, so let's take a look at how this actually works in practice. So what we're going to do is essentially talk about how we would create a mannequin normally and what the limitations of that are if we just kind of stick to this basic system, but maybe we want to draw these larger characters. Because again, it's just good to see what happens when we follow these rules that are set out with a normal set of proportions without adding stuff to it. And then we'll look at the difference between this and the types of proportions you might see in highly exaggerated comics or manga, etc. And then we'll look at kind of how we can create our own mannequin to basically bridge that gap and give us an effective way of posing our more exaggerated figures. So let's look at this basic concept. Let's start with two little figures here that will give us a good contrast and a good starting point to understand, again, just some of the limitations of thinking of things in that more realistic manner. These are the sort of things that I ran up against when I was learning to draw in general, and I think again it's important to understand that we can modify these things, and that's fine. So if we start with some general proportions and just follow the logic of add muscle, let's see what happens. So if we think about our standard set of proportions that I'm just going to rough in here, I've got my pelvis, my rib cage, and I've got my sort of head up here somewhere. Again, I'm being very rough, and normally when I do this, I'm just trying to get something down quickly. Now, normally, if we follow the logic that I often apply, if we add a little bit of extra room or length to the legs, that generally will give us a little bit more of a heroic style of figure. So typically, again, we're going to have shoulders somewhere around here, right? Somewhere in this sort of vicinity. Now, depending on how muscular people are, their shoulders may actually move around a bit, because as you can see on the skeleton, the shoulder isn't actually fixed to anything. It's kind of fixed to these bones that have some level of mobility. So the shoulder can move around depending on how much muscle is there. But there's obviously a limitation to that. So if we think about the logical scientific way that we would do this, we would start by roughing in that skeleton, thinking about where those proportions would go in general. And then what we might say is, okay, let's try and add muscle. And if we add a little bit of muscle here, again, we can add that cape that Loomis sort of adds to the general proportion and the general mannequin. But again, what I'm doing is kind of adding some sort of primary forms here, some big chunky muscles. So if we think about, we've got a deltoid, right? We're going to have a bicep, and we're going to have the forearm muscles, right? And again, I've focused in general on the chest throughout these videos because it's just a little bit easier to sort of explain, but obviously the legs are going to be kind of similar, right? We just add stuff onto that mannequin and away we go. So you can see that, yeah, we're getting quite a, chunky, muscled character here. Now, often, again, what bodybuilders and people who are trying to look really kind of buff are trying to do is often, extend this width, so people often go to quite long lengths to, build this muscle so that, maybe this one sort of sticks out a little bit more, so you get that kind of width across the shoulders. Now, you can see that there's probably a limitation here, right? So the more muscle we add, the more kind of, again, it's going to look quite strong and like a chunky character, but it's not going to, start to look like some of those larger characters in Street Fighter, right? So again, if you sort of look at, any of these big sort of characters from the Street Fighter universe, again, I just use this as an example because these are the kind of characters that, a lot of people are at least a little bit familiar with. Now, again, this is a little bit more of a realistic rendition of the, Street Fighter characters done by the SNK sort of artists. So slightly different sort of take, but if we, look at your traditional sort of Capcom versions of some of these characters, again, you've often got these like really, really, sort of chunky characters, and this kind of level of musculature down there. And it's these kind of things where, again, at some point we sort of run out of room in terms of being able to, like represent this type of musculature with a standard skeleton. Now, if you're thinking, again, like what's realistically happening when people do get that big, because people are quite big, well, often they're just genetically built a little bit different. The skeleton and the frame is going to be genetically a little bit different, and maybe they just, build a lot of muscle on top of it. But even so, I think we'll see the limitations of that as well. Now, if you sort of say, okay, let's move this shoulder out, let's sort of go extreme and sort of see if we have this arm out a little bit further, what happens. So in this case, we could say, look, we still want to stay realistic, right? But how far can we kind of push it? So if we make these muscles, right, even bigger, right? We got some giant sort of deltoids, right? Huge kind of arms. And from front view, the bicep doesn't matter how big you get, it's never going to look that big. But again, we have some big sort of lats coming down here, right? Big kind of forearm muscle. Again, the forearm around here, even on, the biggest bodybuilders, doesn't typically get that big, right? So again, you might see something where we could feasibly, push this maybe this far, right? We make that neck even sort of bigger. So you can see, yeah, like if you're trying to represent something with like very exaggerated realistic proportions, you might just sort of get away with something very similar to this traditional kind of mannequin that Loomis is talking about, because he's really saying let's stick with these proportions. And from a stylistic standpoint, this is where you get to understand how structure will affect style. So as I said, you can obviously draw the same characters in a variety of different ways, and the sort of Capcom artist sort of take on these tends to be a little bit more exaggerated. But as I said before, there are some other versions of those characters which we can kind of look at that were drawn by, again, the artists from a sort of crossover game, right? And you can see how this artist is kind of tempering some of those exaggerations a little bit. And again, this is where style comes into play, and you can look at these concepts of sort of structure and proportion and actually understand how people derive particular styles, right? So in this artist's version of Blanca, the character's still within normal proportion, right? Everyone kind of looks like a normal sort of human, and looks very plausible in this version. Even sort of, Zangief over here, right? Again, like a very, very big person. But if you look at the overall proportion, there's nothing that crazy there. Whereas often, if you have really, really extreme versions of some of these proportions, right? Like these characters are looking, very different. And again, I think in many cases, it's important to kind of just observe that and sort of understand how far we need to push it. So again, we're just trying to explain what's happening and how far you need to go. Now, the reason I kind of harp on about this is, again, when I sort of started, I would sort of come at it from a little bit more of that scientific method, where I sort of thought, look, even these exaggerated sort of characters that are being drawn over there in the Street Fighter world, they must be based on some sort of anatomy, and it's important to sort of stick to the proportion, and scientifically, again, you should be able to build it out. But I think, again, if you're really looking for that crazy level of exaggeration, this proportion is just going to need to be changed a bit. Now, it probably doesn't need to be changed as much as we think, but proportional changes can feel really, really big, even if the actual measurements aren't that big. So, you can see that from a face, for instance, right? If someone has, a big nose or a big mouth, right, we may perceive it as like, oh, that person has a big nose or a big mouth or something. If you actually measure it versus what we would consider a standard sort of mouth or feature size, it's probably, a few millimeters bigger, or much less than what people are often imagining. I don't know what that would be, sort of in inches, but 1/4 of an inch or something like that. Like very, very small changes. So if we want to sort of look at, okay, let's make one of these really sort of chunky characters that kind of feels like, so I'm not sort of, that feels like they're very big. So in this case, I'm going to not draw from the mannequin necessarily, although I've got it as a little base to kind of keep me honest, right? A little sort of person in there, and I'm just going to sort of exaggerate that, right? But in this case, what we want to do is really sort of push those proportions. Now, again, apologies, I am sort of sticking with, drawing these sort of buff, monstrous sort of male characters, right? We can do some similar videos in the future, maybe talking about sort of female characters and different sort of types of anatomy and stuff like that, just using this as an example. So again, I'll still stick with a similar set of proportions in terms of the length of the limbs, right? So still keeping those limbs, again, like the elbow coming down a little bit close to that sort of where the navel or bottom of that rib cage is going to be, right? So imagine maybe there's still a rib cage in there. Now, if you're thinking about this from a process standpoint and be like, okay, but what are you doing? In this case, you could consider this to be like a character design, right? So designing the character, figuring out what their proportions are, is something that is a little bit more messy than replicating those proportions over time, again and again and again. Once you figure out what these proportions are, then you can construct your own mannequin version of it that sort of includes these proportions, which is what we'll do next. But the purpose here is just to show again how far we would probably have to move from this to get it to look kind of really big. And again, just being rough here. Got some legs, and again, so we're going to have the hands end again like a little bit above the knee, big, strong, long arms. Right, if we just kind of add some fairly cartoony level of sort of musculature and stuff. Boom. Right, we've got some sort of lats there, pectorals, big chunky neck, right, big sort of traps. Boom. Again, just being a little bit cartoony with it. So you can see that the size of this character is starting to move a little bit away from your normal anatomy. And I think that's what you'll find. This is why, if you look at the Loomis book, he sort of talks about this, because if you consider proportion, I think it's sort of here, yeah, you can kind of see how proportion is modified. If we look at the sort of normal academic proportions, and again, this is the kind of spread where, again, I first looked at it and I was like, yeah, I sort of don't understand, which one do I want to view? Whereas I feel like the value in here is not necessarily in thinking about which one do you want to draw, but what proportions will give you what particular feeling, right? Is the character really strong and big? And what Loomis is kind of saying is, typically when people are talking about academic proportion, they're going to talk about either your sort of normal, like 7.5 heads high proportion, or your sort of idealistic version of that. So I think this sort of version of the skeleton, the écorché sort of models that I've got, I think this is probably a little bit more in that sort of idealistic frame, right? It's quite a large, strong, powerful character. Obviously, many of these things change depending on, what type of character you have, what type of genetics they have, etc., etc. These are just based on those ideals. Now, we obviously want to go a lot further, because he's only talking about those things as being the things that he has to draw, which is, a heroic sort of superhero character or a fashion figure, which is going to be taller, etc. But again, we can get a lot bigger still. So again, what we can do is think about how big this needs to be. And you can see that, again, we're starting to deviate as we get more cartoony, as we get more exaggerated. We're starting to deviate quite a bit from the proportions that you're going to see, right? Again, these shoulders are going to get really sort of wide, and the neck is going to get, really chunky. And, you could probably take it even further if you wanted. Right, if we want to make this even bigger, got a really, again. So one of the really valuable things to think about from a proportional standpoint is that the mannequin is still often useful when it comes to placing these secondary muscular forms. So having the rib cage in there is really good, because the separation between the pectorals and where the rib cage goes is, and where the deltoid and the arm muscles are going, is often what sort of defines, again, where that kind of armpit area is. So having the line of where the rib cage sort of goes in here, like this line, actually gives us a good sort of visual representation about where those sort of muscles that are going to wrap around and kind of make up the, right, we're going to have some sort of abs here somewhere, right, and we often get these sort of muscles that are going to sort of wrap around here, and then you've often got the lats that are coming behind all that, and this gives us this sense of proportion and overlap, etc. So again, the point is that even if you're going exaggerated, the system still has value, right? So it's not about throwing the whole thing away. It's just a matter of understanding the exaggeration you need to go to. And there's, again, a few other considerations that we'll discuss at the next stage when we try and construct a mannequin based off this. But again, just understand, when I'm drawing it, even though I'm sort of not following a mannequin, having my understanding of where the skeleton is at a rough, at a rough clip, right? Again, not exactly, but just understanding some of those things just allows me to put in some of those anatomical markers. So yeah, there's a huge value to the system, even if you're kind of saying, well, hey, look, the proportions aren't exactly the same as what I want to draw, right? Again, we might make those wrists and hands, even bigger so that they look really chunky, right? Might have some big sort of chunky legs. So again, we can expand upon this mannequin as well, make it even sort of bigger, right? Really build out the things that people tend to look at when we're dealing with really sort of big characters. And it could just be, again, you're drawing a book or a project, or you're designing characters for games, and just everyone's just really jacked, right? It's like something like Gears of War, where just everyone looks like they're a bodybuilder for some strange reason. Or it could just be, maybe this is one of the sort of bad characters, or an antagonist or something like that in your story. Either way, good to be able to draw it. So again, that's the basic idea there. So hopefully that makes sense. We can see that there are limitations to that. And again, the role here is just to sort of look at, and again, this character is physically bigger, right? But if you just kind of look at what's happening here, you can sort of start to see that it's going to be hard to kind of get to here from here. You're going to need to, again, make the character a lot longer, keep the head a little bit smaller. You're going to need to do a number of other things. Now, the other thing that often happens is when we take this and we try and pose it, what you'll notice, or this is certainly my experience, is that if we just start with even Loomis's addition of the cape, it tends to be quite challenging to figure out what a character like this is going to look like when they're posed in that manner. So let's just quickly take a look at that. Now, I'm going to be using pretty standard poses, nothing sort of too tricky, but we'll sort of look at a couple of instances. So again, where's a good place? Probably here, right? So if we think about just a standard pose, right? Standard sort of pose here, right? So I'm drawing this kind of rib cage egg, right? We're going to have a head somewhere up here, and I'm drawing a line to kind of represent this line in three-dimensional space, right? So we can kind of imagine we sort of have a grid. Again, we will do some more videos talking about the structural aspects of this and how we actually do this from a drawing perspective. But again, if we just sort of take the points, right, the skeletal points, the stick figure here, and we say, okay, I'm just going to draw that, right? We got this big character, right? The head's maybe a little bit smaller, and I've got, right, some arms coming up. So again, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to think about where that bottom of the rib cage is going to be, where that navel is going to be, and then I'm kind of tracing it, right? Almost like if we think about maybe if this bone was kind of rotated up, right? Boom. Right, so we can think about there's a bone there and it can kind of rotate, right? It has arcs of motion. It could also be foreshortened, right? Like coming at the camera, but that's sort of one of the things I'm trying to visualize. So there we go. So you can see that, again, it's not instantly giving me the exact right look. It's not giving me exactly what I need. It's looking a little bit funny. Now, if we add the cape, that is going to help somewhat. We put it in there. Right, we got this kind of cape that goes around a little bit and fills out some of that. That's going to give us a pretty good indication. But again, what I would find is that this is doing a good job of representing the difference between a normal human. Ooh, where we go? Here we go. So it's doing a good job of sort of representing the difference between normal human anatomy versus the skeleton. But when we've got these other things like the big shoulders, I find it's actually better often to just sort of put in a rough kind of guide of where those shoulders are. And this really is, again, like the whole point of this sort of video and exercise is just to kind of demonstrate these basic ideas. So you can see if I sort of put in those deltoids and again I start to kind of put in the neck as a rough sort of indication, that is something that to me starts to make the character fill out a little bit and take up the amount of space that they're going to. Now these are very simple forms, and the point here to pay attention to when it comes to a lot of these ideas is that what we're trying to do is optimize for two things. The first is that we want the posing and the system that we're using to be as easy as possible. And that's where you'll understand that the stick figure, the lines, the skeletal version of this is the easiest thing to pose. It's very easy for me to say, well, what if this character put their arm up, right? I'm just drawing two lines. And that really is the beauty of it. But the second thing we need to think about is what's effective. And that's where I think adding additional things like Loomis's little cape to represent the shoulders and some of the lats is very effective because it's easy to draw, but it adds a huge amount. Now, the other thing that I would find that's quite effective is, again, just adding a little bit of bulk here to help us imagine what the character is going to look like, just from a general sort of mass sense, right? So just looking at it, I get a better feeling if we add a few things that represent the overall look of the character. And again, that's really all we need to do is just think about this. What do I need to add in order to represent and understand what this character is going to look like? Keep in mind that is what the mannequin is. The mannequin is just an easy, effective way for me to quickly gauge what a pose is going to look like. That's it. So the easiest way you could sort of think about that, as I said, is here's the skeleton, but there are limitations to that. So this is what we'll do. And the other thing I want to do as we sort of demonstrate this, because we'll just do a few little poses and talk about, again, how we might use this idea to kind of help us change the general sort of structure and posing. Again, just in a very, very basic sense. The other thing we'll do is look at how you can create wildly divergent mannequins for characters that maybe don't even have typical human anatomy at all. So let's jump over and have a go at that. All right, so if we look at our typical character and how we can use that to demonstrate what's going on. Again, we're going to go for a muscly character, very similar to the one that we were drawing before. So in this case, now that I have an idea for what those bigger proportions are going to be, what I'm going to do is just draw my mannequin in the same way that I normally would, but in this case I'm going to change the proportions a little bit more. Again, I'm just doing this by eye, and I'm not sort of measuring it, but again, this is the advantage of spending ages doing these more mundane exercises, is you get to internalize some of that proportion. So I'm moving the shoulders out a lot because that's how I would still do it. And at this point, again, I'm just planning the drawing. I don't really have a good idea for how it's going to look or whether or not it's going to work or anything like that. At the moment, we're just still in planning phase, but you can see the efficiency is pretty high. Now I'm going to drop a rough center line down there to help me gauge the balance. And again, I'm imagining we've got a horizon line somewhere around here, and not a lot of perspective, but these things are going to sort of slowly, right, be on a grid that's kind of coming away from us. If you're wondering what I'm talking about, basically we just have a perspective grid here. If we think about this as our page, that looks a bit like this. Here we've got horizon line, boom, right? And so that just means that these vanishing points for this kind of grid, right, or little sort of box, again it could be a box if we were making it a box, but those are just lines which kind of represent lines which would be going to a vanishing point, probably again a few meters that way. Alright, so I'm trying to find that point on the ground that sort of represents where that character is standing above the ground, and obviously this leg now is a little bit more closer to that center of the balance, and this leg is kind of out a bit. So they're resting more on this leg, which typically is going to sort of tilt the axis of this a bit this way. Now, I don't want to get too much into these. Again, we can do further videos to explore all these different concepts, but just walking you through the basic idea of what's going. Again, if we wanted to add sort of contrapposto balance to that, which is one of these things you guys might have sort of heard of, is again we could like draw this line so that it's right sort of opposing. Oh, can't see that. Yeah. Anyway, pretty simple concept. Because again, when you typically drop your hips down, your shoulders will move in the opposite direction to compensate, i.e. these will sort of compress and these will decompress. Just one of those functions of human movement. But I'm just going to keep it pretty straight for simplicity's sake. So yeah, let's remove some of those, and we'll just keep it simple. But again, just keep in mind these are the kind of things that you can think about at this early stage. So even though I'm not sure about all the rest, I can still think through like how's the character sitting, how they moving, what's going on, which is the whole point of using these systems, right? And thinking about it this way. So here we're going to have, from a skeletal standpoint, we're going to have a skull somewhere here, right? Let's add dimensionality to that skull, right? Let's define a point, drop a line down, and then we're going to have a rough skull. Again, I wouldn't rough that in too much because I'd need to sort of double check proportions and make sure this sort of skull is the right size. But again, I've got a skeleton here, and I've set the proportions pretty well, and I can think about all of the things easily, right? So again, remember that first point is easy. It's very easy for me to pose, but it's not very effective, right? Because it doesn't really look like the character, it just looks like a silly skeleton. So from a mannequin standpoint, again, as I said, you could easily add that cape, right? Think about, oh yeah, let's add that cape to sort of represent a bit more of that form. But just as easily, right, thinking about just massing in or adding those football-sized deltoids can really help. And the other thing that I would tend to do is sort of think about and look at where that, if we go here, look at where that spine is going, right? Connecting the skull to the rib cage, right? Going along there, where that sort of curve is. I often find it quite good to go in there and draw that in. So I'm sort of imagining this line here, going down here, right? It goes like this in this kind of interesting little S curve. And so I'm sort of imagining that spine going back, and I'm doing draw through. So drawing stuff that is behind other things. This is another reason why doing it in a very simple way to the skeleton is very effective, because we can, just use lines to kind of gauge proportion and feeling. And you can see that depending on how you move those lines or adjust things, it's going to greatly influence the feel of the character. So just adding a few little balls here, just these kind of spheres that anyone can draw. Again, placing them is a little bit more tricky, because you sort of have to think about the perspective and what's going on there. But that really is what we need to do. Again, one of the things that I would try and do, that I was still saying before, is just add that neck in, right? Again, you want that kind of chunky neck. And again, we're just looking at a few lines that are going to rough in the proportion. Now, none of this is 100% final. So this is a case where I would fully expect some of these lines that I put in to maybe be requiring significant reworking. Especially, if we're trying to fit or match any particular anatomy. But the thing is, you can see I'm starting to get a feel for the mass of the character, right? Like, how big are they? Where do they sit? And I could draw the anatomy on top of this. And I think that, again, is sort of where it becomes effective, because these things that I'm putting on are very much going to be part of the finished drawing. So I'm indicating things that I know are probably going to be there, or with the case of these forearms, are kind of just approximating the bulk of that massive sort of forearm muscle. Again, we can change them, you can move the neck around, but from a basic standpoint, again, pretty quickly we've sort of roughed in a figure, and this figure is quite chunky. Now, again, just talking about the basic concept here, if I was to repose, what I would start with is what's easy, which is the stick. And the stick, again, if I was to sort of do something like, let's think about where the pivot of that shoulder is going to be. But let's move the arm, right? Let's think about where that arm might go. Right, if we just move the arm up here, again, not a very interesting pose, but just sort of doing it, as a demonstration. And again, I'm not going to put too much foreshortening on this, because again, we'll talk a little bit more about how to do that later. But again, that's probably something for another video as well, because obviously there's a lot of sophistication and drawing ability you need to build in order to kind of start to make sure that the sort of, if you think about my arm being here, right, again, that's easier to draw than if my arm is kind of here, because now I'm sort of compressing, right? So the foreshortening tends to just be a little bit more, let's say, processor intensive on your brain. And but we'll talk about, again, the systems just in a sec, the systems for how you would just quickly think about maybe modifying the way that you draw this, or what you focus on if you did want to foreshorten the arm there. But just to go back to this, again, the basic idea here is, okay, I've moved that arm. That probably means, again, this sort of ball is going to raise up a little bit, which is typically what happens, right? As your shoulder moves up, these muscles move up. And again, I've sort of got this ball here. And again, you can see that's giving me a pretty good indication of just, where this character is going to be. Now, the more sophisticated you get, the more you get used to drawing your particular character, the more you can modify these base primary sort of mannequin indicators, whatever you want to call it, right? This just kind of like stick with a bunch of muscle on it. The more you get used to drawing your actual character, the more you can modify these forms and indications of your mannequin to be very specific. So, you don't have to stick with this sort of simple form, right? It's whatever's easy and whatever's effective. So these are our sort of first principles here. All you have to think about is like, what's easy and what's effective. The reason we still use the mannequin, and the reason that it's important, is because if you start drawing without the mannequin, or you haven't put in these sort of pivot points for where you think these shoulders are going to be, then what you'll sort of find is changing the pose or kind of figuring out, where some of these other things are is actually going to be a lot harder. So this is why personally I sort of prefer this type of drawing system, is because again, it allows you to kind of quickly plan stuff. And again, the next thing that we would kind of do is obviously start to mass in and sort of think about where some of those muscles go. If we were to sort of draw this in a little bit more detail. And again, you could either do that by, I'm just kind of doing a mix of guesstimating plus putting in muscles that I kind of know probably are going to be there. You could either, really sort of go into the anatomy side of it, construct them out, whatever you wanted. But either way, the point here is that is a good way to sort of indicate where those things go. And again, for me, makes, just sort of filling in the lines, right? Connecting the dots between here and here pretty easy. So this is where, again, it may seem simple, but if you pay attention to proportion and you're building it on an accurate base, it's actually pretty easy to then just go, oh, well, yeah, I just add in this and add in that. Again, once you know the anatomy. So hopefully that gives you an idea for what we need to do to create our own mannequin to sort of basically match an existing character. But the last thing I want to go over is, well, what if you're not drawing a typical set of anatomy? Again, I'll do another video talking about female anatomy and going over, again, as I said, probably another video talking about adding costumes and stuff. But again, just quickly we can go over if we were to draw something maybe like a little sort of trolly, ogre-y sort of character, which is another thing that I tend to do. So in that case, we're probably dealing with a mannequin that's actually quite divergent. And it might look a little bit more like this, where we have a big rib cage, right? Again, just going off a little character I sort of drawn before. Might have a big sort of giant rib cage, right? Big, giant sort of shoulders, but maybe just this little sort of pelvis with little legs. Again, I'm sort of basing this a little bit on, I guess, sort of simian ape anatomy. I think that was kind of the idea, right? And again, the character will have like a big sort of trolley head. So if we think about a character that's going to look a little bit more like this, again, I'm just drawing it so that you can see where I'm going. But this is the basic idea. If we have something that's even more weird like that, then how do we do it? Well, again, as you can see, it should be pretty simple. What we do is we think about the mannequin we would create for that. And this is where, again, experimenting, playing around with it as you build your character library, as you design the character, you figure out how you need to kind of draw them again and again. That'll be its own sort of challenge. So in this case, actually, I had the shoulders out there. I'm going to try with the shoulders in, because I think that was a little bit more what this character was like. We had, again, sort of arms coming out like this. All right, and we have some legs that are a little bit smaller. And again, I'm not sure whether I had. You could also do some sort of animal legs if you wanted. We could do that. I'll just do that to sort of explore general idea. So the process I'm going to use is very similar. We just sort of think about who the character is and what things will help us both pose and get close to that original character. So one of the things that, again, I think was a big part of that was this big chunky neck. So we've got this big chunky neck here and some big pectoral muscles. But I think the idea of these big bowls, right, just adding these big spherical masses for the shoulder is going to work really well. And again, same for those forearms. And I've got that same idea. And again, here, not sure. Maybe these might be a little bit small, right? Again, we can still put in quite large sort of pelvic plates that match what we're doing and end up with something pretty similar. Let's sharpen this pencil a little bit. So hopefully you can see again, it's gonna look very different, but it's essentially the same idea, exactly the same concept. And then what we do is think about, okay, now we need to kind of fill this in. Right, so I think when I was designing some of these sort of characters before, they were quite definitely, yeah, sort of stout in their set of proportions. Now you can also play around with how much sort of body fat or sort of mass is going to be there. You know, you don't have to obviously draw everyone as being hyper lean or whatever. Right, a lot of that is just looking at reference, looking at indications of, you know, how people store fat depending on what they're doing. Again, you know, a lot of wrestlers and, you know, people who are, you know, definitely sort of compact in their proportions, but still, you know, very sort of wide and, you know, chunky. You know, this can still be very effective at fighting, let's say. So, you know, we don't need to make everyone hyper lean and or anything like that. So yeah, you can see here, just adding in some of that musculature. And again, you know, you can see that this is, you know, helping me to build this sort of character, right? We'll sort of mass in some other shapes here. And again, I'm going to drop that sort of stomach down as well. Again, lots and lots of different types of anatomy out there. You know, even, you know, within the realms of very sort of highly functional, you know, anatomy. Again, strong men are going to look different from people doing, you know, other types of, you know, workouts and other sort of competitive sports, etc. Really good to kind of think about that, because it definitely affects the look and the feel of the character, right? But again, you know, this is the basic idea of what we're kind of working with. And yeah, that's kind of how I, you know, start to build that. So it's you know, again, we could really sort of build these out. Now, just want to quickly talk about the concept of foreshortening. Again, we can't go too in depth on it, because that is a whole video unto itself, but it's worth mentioning, and it might be something you're thinking about. So here, again, going to get some, still probably looks like we're going to need a pretty chunky set of feet and stuff to support this. Right, where are they sitting? Yeah, to support this frame. There's a non-trivial individual up top. And again, here's where we could probably play with the fantasy anatomy a little bit. Do something. Again, a lot of the character, you know, is going to be in this kind of face. Right. Again, maybe they've got some sort of jowls, or the neck is kind of quite strong. Right. Again, just rough. But that gives you an idea for how we might apply some of these concepts to a more fantasy character. But as I was saying, let's look at that foreshortening. Now, as we change, you can see that one's a little bit easier, but what if we kind of move this up so it's coming at us? So in this case, what I'm doing is I'm kind of saying, well, this is actually just, right, directly coming at us. Now, what you'll find is that the stick figure is terrible at telling us what this is going to look like. It's very easy but it's very, very, ineffective. So this is where, even if you're just thinking about massing in that figure at this sort of initial phase, it's very useful to just sort of rough in or place in this form, right? So if we think about this from a basic standpoint, basic form drawing standpoint, right, we've kind of got our egg-shaped torso, and we've got a deltoid, right, another deltoid over there, head is here. And if we want this to kind of come at us, again, it could be coming directly at the camera. And in this case, we want to focus and prioritize on what's effective for that. So in that case, we're going to focus on the cylinder of the arm, right? Here we've still got that deltoid, right? But again, what we want to do is just place in something that's going to indicate that there's mass there. So in this case, again, it's just a matter of kind of, maybe putting in or massing in. Could just be another kind of vague mass, right? But again, what we'll do is we'll try and find some form within that to kind of help us. So again, this is where probably from a muscle sort of standpoint, this is going to affect drastically, all right, what happens to those pectorals. They're going to be sort of driven up a lot more. We're going to have our kind of bicep here that's going to be sort of hidden. And again, I won't go in some crazy way into the details of how we sort of build that sort of musculature up. Again, that's its own video, but you can see how, again, what we're kind of after is effective. And often the skeleton itself, again, you can sort of move it up and say, here's the skeleton foreshortened, right? It's just coming directly at us, right? It's that sort of thing where, again, when something's properly foreshortened, right, you kind of don't see it at all. And that's where, again, what you tend to find is you need to add a little bit of mass, especially when you're dealing with these kind of big, sort of chunky characters, to get a feeling for what that's going to be. But if you don't have the easy bit, which just kind of tells you, oh yeah, like where is that limb, then it's very hard to do the next step, which is effective. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a rough idea of how to implement the concept of the Loomis mannequin. And I've given you a couple of different sort of versions of what would happen, and hopefully kind of answered some questions that might sort of be coming up for you there. But that basically is the difference. When you're drawing some cool stuff like a Capcom art book, right, we often have to add stuff. We often have to create interesting shapes, and it's often just a matter of figuring out, okay, this is what you want to do. What is the most effective way to kind of block in a character like that? And I think, again, that really is to a certain degree up to you. It's your character, and you know what lets you think through these things better than other people. And that's where learning it on the basic sort of human mannequin is really useful, because you kind of have a set point. You know where you're meant to go with it. And that is the value of the boring standard academic version of anatomy, is at least that way we know when we're making mistakes. Whereas here, it's a lot harder to tell, because as you add anatomy and you mess around with it, right, you can sort of say, oh, maybe I just want them to be bigger, or maybe I just want them to be smaller here or there. The problem is consistency will fall down if you are trying to draw the same character again and again and again. So if you draw the same character again and again and again, mannequins proportion are super, super useful because they keep you honest. But again, in the beginning, it can be just better to kind of practice with the standard sort of thing. Although, as I always say, the more fun you can make this, the better. So if you just want to sort of really dig down and, you want to draw some sort of cartoony, simple orc-style characters, then, just start there. Get that mannequin for yourself. Figure out how it works. If you're wanting to do fan art, again, see if you can kind of break this down, find your favorite characters, see if you can kind of figure out a nice, effective way of sort of drawing them. As I said before, you know, you have that example of your sort of Chun-Li character from Street Fighter who has these really, really big shoulder pads, and big shoulder pads might be really critical to the whole overall look, as might be, you know, a variety of other features, right? So again, having those big shoulder pads there as part of that anatomy, you know, where you kind of have, again, just a little sort of example, right? You've got your torso, right? You've got your sort of shoulders, right? Again, you might want to really say, you know what, this is the mannequin, you know? It's super important to have, you know, these things there, because they really help you understand where the character is. And as the character moves around and you understand the mass, then you get a good read on what that anatomy is going to look like. Again, at its core, that is the point. You want to easily and effectively gauge how your drawing is going to be proportionally accurate and what it's going to look like. It's very easy to kind of pose with this stick figure or just kind of start drawing, but you don't really have a quick read on, like, is this pose going to work? You know, is this arm going to overlap the face? Or, you know, is this going to be good? Not all poses are created equal. Just because you can draw it doesn't mean it's going to look good. Think of this from a photographer's standpoint, from someone who is building a film or staging a fight scene. They're going to get the actors to pose in a way that is dynamic, shows good form, shows the character's face, shows the leading lines from the camera angle, etc., etc. Not all poses you can put your character in are going to look good. So you often have to find the ones that are going to look good and also do what you want. And that's where, again, these systems really, really come into their own. Anyway, that's all I've got for this one. I don't want to keep going. We'll add to this over time on the channel, so, you know, check that out. In the future, subscribe, etc., or check out the free quick start guide if you're wanting to learn your own line and color style in Photoshop. Other than that, we'll catch you around. Happy drawing.